You might be wondering why something like owning the outcome makes it onto this podcast. Isn't this a AI podcast about the future of stuff? Well, breaking frames isn't just about technology. At the end of the day, property management will forever be a people business. So, when I saw Mark Brower talking about this radical outlook into owning the outcome, radical ownership, I knew we had to have him on the podcast, because at the end of the day, these types of mindsets are what will allow you to break the frame. Mark is a super interesting guy. He's out in Phoenix, runs Mark Brower Properties. He's a property manager himself. And this idea of owning the outcome, I thought was just like this core value philosophy, but it turns out it allows him to recruit better talent. It allows him to have better clients. It's building a higher LTV, lower churn, more efficient business on the back end, right? That is what I call leverage. You don't just use technology to have leverage. It has to do with policy. It has to do with the way that you approach problems. And Mark approaches problems in a super interesting way, in a way that I would dare to say breaks the frame of what I expected. Enjoy this conversation with Mark Brower. Welcome to the Property Management Frame Breakers podcast. I'm your host, Pablo Gonzalez, and I am here to introduce you to the folks in the property management space that have broken the frame of what you may believe was possible. This podcast is presented by Vendoroo. It is your all-in-one AI solution for resolving your maintenance needs. Let's go. Mark Brower, this is something that I have very much looked forward to since I listened to your podcast with Peter Lohman, right? I think I reached out to you immediately. We've become somewhat fast friends. I'm texting you as I'm driving home for Christmas because I'm so pumped about the future of our relationship. But when you went on Peter's podcast and you talked about this radical ideology around completely owning the outcome, and then it felt like Peter challenged you, and it felt like it made kind of like a uncomfortable scenario, and your conviction just elevated more and more with it. This is something that I really wanted to dive into and pick your brain. So I would just like to start there and say, this philosophy, own the outcome, for those of you that have, for our friend that's listening right now that didn't listen to this entire conversation with Peter, what do you mean by it, man? What is own the outcome to you as a business, as a person? How do you talk about it?
Yeah. So when I think of owning the outcome, there's so much that we don't control in life, right? If going back to old school Stephen Covey, there's a larger circle of influence and there's a very small circle within that influence, which is our circle of control. And generally speaking, in property management, Peter Lohman said it well. He said, the surface area we cover is so vast. And there's so much we do, and there's so much out of our control, from resident actions to owner actions to vendor actions. It's very tempting at some point when we're doing property management to put a fence around what we're going to own. And if we are going to 100% go for owning the outcome, it means that we own the result of every relationship and every interaction, even and especially when those interactions and those relationships don't go the way we would hope.
It sounds a lot like extreme ownership. Did you read a Jocko Willink book and
Oh, absolutely.
decide to go all in?
Absolutely.
Is that what happened?
Man, you
Yeah.
just pulled that right out of our playbook. Yeah, our previous iteration of this company value was extreme ownership, because I love Jocko. I love how he took full ownership of something that he wasn't directly involved in because it was under his supervision. In fact, in life, what I love to do is it's almost like if you get snarky about it, like if you're in a scenario where everybody's pointing fingers at each other, and if you just step up, even if you had nothing to do with the scenario, and say, it's my fault, 100% my fault. It's like, okay, we just stopped this ridiculous blame game because someone stepped up and took ownership. People become leaders because they're willing to take more ownership than most people would dare. They're audacious enough to say, my responsibility, my fault, my ownership. And what they do in that moment of daring is they significantly expand that circle of influence. And that should be our goal constantly. How do I expand my circle of influence? When Jocko Willink, when there was that situation, if you haven't read Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, absolutely read the book. There was friendly fire, and it was friendlies against friendlies shooting at each other. This is like the cardinal rule: do not do this in war, right? And then the brass came and they deconstructed everything, and he got on stage and he said, whose fault was this? And one of his SEALs said, it was my fault. I was supposed to radio in my position. I didn't do it. Somebody, he said, no, it's not your fault. Somebody else says, it was my fault. This was supposed to happen. We were ahead of schedule. I didn't make it clear. Nope, not your fault. Down the line, his guys and different leaders in that room said, this is my fault. And he said, it's my fault. In that moment, he manifested the fact that he was the guy that could be trusted. Everything is about trust. And when someone dares to say, I take full ownership of this outcome, their trustworthiness goes through the roof. When someone says, not my problem, how dare you blame me for this, what's going on right now? And I'm angry and pissed that you would suggest that this is my fault. What happens? Circle of influence shrinks, trust drops. We're moving the wrong direction.
Man, that was great. You know, for me, as somebody that has always thought very deeply about influence, the more I learn of it, the more it's about aligning incentives with people. And what I'm hearing with you is that when you own the outcome, you're aligning incentives with people. And when you draw a boundary around what's your problem, what's not your problem, you are decoupling from being aligned in incentives, right? And when I first interacted with your philosophy on this, it sounded like a core value thing to set you apart in a marketplace. But as you describe it now, it feels like it is the thing that you are doing to recruit all-star players on your team, which is the foundational piece of like recruit and nurture and enable an all-star team, which is like the foundation of business success. Am I warm there? Is this more of like a leadership principle within your team more so than just like a marketing thing?
I think that's an outcome of
Mm,
leveling up our thinking. I think that's an
mm,
outcome of owning the outcome. I think A players want to work for leaders who are able and willing to challenge them to be their best. And this idea of owning the outcome is definitely on the frontier. It's on the front lines of personal development, of personal transformation, of becoming the best version of ourselves. I feel like God, very religious, forgive me if this offends anybody, but God put us here on this earth to first discover what our gifts and talents are, and then to use those gifts and talents in the service of others. And we don't experience maximum joy through personal growth and personal transformation unless we're on that path somehow. And the hardest things to do in life, where we experience the most personal transformation, I think, include espousing ideas like, I'm going to take extreme ownership. I'm going to own the outcome in a way that's uncomfortable, that most people aren't willing to do. I'm going to step into that position of faith and belief that I can affect more change than most people would dare to think that they could do. And that's going to define me, and it's going to accelerate my personal transformation. I think that's what people come for. That's what people are working for. What is pay, like fourth or fifth on the list? So I think there is
yeah.
a connection between this idea of challenging A players to own the outcome. I think that is something that they're willing to come for and fight for.
Man, that rings so true. So a couple of weeks ago, we did a strategic offsite planning for 2025 at Vendoroo. We all, like we're internationally distributed. So we met up in London. We were on a, we were like on a houseboat in London for 5 days. It was incredible. And this idea kind of like really reverberates through the things I took away, right? Like I took away number one, the idea that when I first engaged with Vendoroo, like I just realized everybody on the leadership team was like former founders. They're all people that wanted to own it, right? Like, and this idea of like recruiting people that want to own stuff is leads to like a really, really rich talent density. The other thing that was very eye-opening to me is that we all went around talking about what is the thing that we would die for, right? And like everybody set their family and stuff like that, but everybody also had their own take on they would die for personal agency, right? Like and that the coupling of those two things, this idea that you want people on your team that want to own it, right? Like they want to solve the problem and make it go away as a leader, and that the most high performing people are driven by agency. They are driven by this kind of thing. Felt like a big takeaway moment that is reminding me of what you're saying of like these outcomes that you're achieving. What other I want to get into like what is own the outcome and how do you do it, but what other outcomes are you getting from owning the outcome? If we're already establishing the fact that you are attracting and keeping much higher level talent, what are the other outcomes that we get into before we talk about how hard this is?
Well, we have an audacious vision at Mark Brower Properties. It almost scares me to say it out loud. We want to create a nationwide brand of the equivalent of what Charles Koch created in his industry. Charles Koch is one of my business heroes. He philosophized that if he could harness the true principles that exist in a free and prosperous society, and he used the United States of America as his example. If he could identify and harness those true principles and imbue them into his organization, that company, which if we think about companies inherently, they're almost like a dictatorship, right? Because they're command and control. Someone at the top controls all the means of productions, and they can dictate what everybody does. What if we could turn a company into a free market society type environment? Maybe it would spontaneously grow rapidly on its own accord, just like the United States of America has been the most successful experiment in freedom the world has ever seen. And what if we could create so this idea, the idea that there's ideas worth dying for, that there's
Mm,
ideas worth living for, I think is really powerful. I think the ideas already exist. I think that what's required, and I think what A players are looking for, is a leader that has the courage to say, we're going to stand for this. We're
yeah.
going to do things like lead with value creation. We're going to dare to believe in only good profits. We're going to own the outcome. We're going to lean into difficult moments of personal transformation because that's what we came for. I think those ideas are really powerful. And I can't remember your question right now because I'm just
No, I'm into this, man. Yeah, yeah.
remind me of your question because I think there's a connection here. What did you just ask me?
Well, I was asking outside of recruiting and
Yes.
retaining top talent, what are
Yeah.
other I said was the goal here to do this, right? To retain and
Right.
recruit talent. And you said it was an outcome. What are other outcomes that you
The out
that
yes, one
yeah.
of the other outcomes is we want to create as much value as we possibly can.
Hmm.
That there's a fallacy that you should be paid more for what you're already doing. The truth is we should do more than what we're being paid for. How can we do more than what we're getting paid for right now? And how can we do that all the time? And how can we start deliberately identifying what our unique ability is and how it matches our clients' needs, and how our unique ability can absolutely continuously increase as much as possible additional value that we're bringing to our client so that they're overwhelmed with value, so that they reciprocate with the generous contribution back to us in additional profits. And how do we stay ahead of that? How do we leave so much meat on the bone for our client that they're feeling like they should, that they're constantly getting a surplus? How do we contribute that surplus to residents, to vendors, to owners? How do we dare to stand for that idea coupled with owning the outcome? Because that is one of the outcomes, right? So
Hmm.
owning the outcome allows us to enter into a philosophy of abundance and value creation and mutual cycles of long-term beneficial cycles of mutual benefit, right? Where we
Yeah.
think about everyone we're interacting with like a partner. You can't think about people as a partner if you're making excuses and you're putting a fence around what you're going to own. Partnerships develop when both sides are contributing generously to each other. If
Yeah.
we could dare to enter in relationships with owners, we can talk about how this is really difficult in property management in a moment because I'm sure there's a lot of people in their head thinking like, "Are you
We
kidding me? Are
will.
you property management? This is impossible with my landlords." But
Yeah.
if we could dare to dream or see a vision of high value, contribution oriented, value creation, mutually beneficial long term partnerships with our clients, man, all kinds of things open up. And that thing, that flywheel can turn and can grow exponentially. Look at all the tech companies that entered property management in the last half a decade that failed. One after, line them up, fail, 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 fail. What was the reason for their failure? My opinion, they didn't understand the fundamental underlying premise of property management, that there's a very fragile trust between accidental, inexperienced, unsophisticated business owner. They own a rental business. This is a business owner. They're an accidental landlord, but they're a business owner and their property manager. Okay. So if we understand that that's the fundamental issue, and if we're going to scale a property management business, everything has to connect and reinforce that level of trust. Then what are the ideas? What are the practices? What are the philosophies that enable that to happen?
I know you told me to challenge you, Mark, but so much stuff that here that you said, I just really kind of want to like rephrase in a couple of different ways. Number one, and I'll just go in backwards order. I totally get it, like why tech has failed in property management. I feel that coming myself from a service business, right? Like coming myself from the world where I've wanted to own an outcome. One of the biggest issues that I have with the SaaS world is that the SaaS world, software as a service, is so focused on scale that the things that you need to do to build trust, they are constantly trying to separate themselves from because they categorize it under the not scalable thing, right? And I think that that's at the core issue. This idea of they are purposefully not trying to own outcomes. Most softwares, if you see them, they're trying to be like a flashlight in the journey or a better checklist or whatever it is that like adds these incremental kind of like improvements as opposed to these exponential improvements of being able to own it and take it off your plate. So I totally feel you there. But what I want to really break down in what you just described to me, this idea of how do you stack your value so much if you can stack your value higher than your customers stack of cash, you are never going to run out of business, right?
Right.
And that was a big thing for me learning in my entrepreneurial journey of we're so focused on the ask so often because we have to sell and we have to bring it in that we lose sight of what the offer is, right? And if you can win on the offer, then it affects your business in a way that is so much more exponential than being better at sales or scaling a sales team or having more people like doing that stuff. What I see in what you said is if you can create an ideal offer, that allows you to continue to grow because you get to grow through share of wallet, not just share of market, right? Like
Mm.
by becoming the trusted advisor to your landlord, to the property owner, by exceeding their expectations, they're going to continue to go to you whenever they need help and you become that trusted person and that adds in business terms, like higher LTV, lower cost of client acquisition because you're coming in the door with this like completely differentiated thing. And that to me has been the thing that I find that entrepreneurs when that like happens for them, you never go back from it, right? Like when you understand how to under promise and over deliver every single time to like the instance, not just like the one thing that you do, that leads to these like really great businesses to own. So while you are doing the hard thing up front of completely owning the outcome, what you're doing is you're setting yourself up to have a business that's much more fun to operate on the back end because you're handling it on the offer side, not on the ask side.
Absolutely. We can always increase the value that we're bringing to owners. I know some people listening to this conversation will be thinking in their heads, yeah, you don't get it, Mark and Pablo, because I'm bringing so much value to my clients. They're so dumb that they can't even see how great I'm making their life. They're
Mm.
ungrateful, they're irrational, and they're looking at me saying that I am adding tremendous value to people's lives. That's not the problem. The problem is they're still angry with me. And this is ridiculous. And this is why, and they're not, by the way, people that are thinking that are not wrong. They're not wrong.
Correct.
So how do we own the outcome in that situation? Like if for somebody that's thinking like, man, I give personalized service, somebody that's only managing 50 properties and they are working 7 days a week and they're doing everything their clients want, right? How do we explain that their clients aren't happy with them? How do we explain when they're adding tremendous value, but they're being underappreciated and they're adding value that exceeds their compensation to a great margin, but still their clients are unhappy? Like, how do you own that outcome? Because that actually plays out all the time, every day in property management. How do we own that outcome? This is something like at the margin, at the front lines of owning the outcome. This is something we're really focused on right now in my company. Here's my thinking on this. Number one, we own the outcome every single time somebody's upset with us, even if it means that our participation in that result is traced all the way back to the beginning of the relationship where we shouldn't have taken them on as a client. We can own that. We are responsible for that decision every single time. Okay. Sometimes we have to take our responsibility all the way back to that decision in order to own the outcome because there's some people that we shouldn't be working with. The other thing that we can do is trace it back to if I didn't clearly define the parameters of success in my business relationship with this person, I have agreed to let them create their own parameters for success. What a crazy thing. Guess what? You can end up with 600 clients with 600 different rules for success. How are you going to run that business? You're not going to run that business well. We can also take owning the outcome back to, hey, did I really clearly communicate what a reasonable expectation was for this stage in your customer journey or this particular scenario that we're dealing with? I'm thinking of like a flood in a house. How many floods have we dealt with in houses? We've dealt with enough. Do we know there's a pattern to how things go? Yes. Do we know that residents and owners continuously get upset with floods in houses, at least 30 to 50% of the time, if not 80% of the time? Yes. Okay. What have we done to create materials that are easy to consume, that are very clear and concise, that establish the parameters and signal and prime the owner that this is how this scenario is going to play out? We've been here before. This is what you should expect. We're taking the lead. Trust us as the expert. We'll give you updates as we get them, but do not expect us to stop everything and give you a real-time update of every detail and every variable that's going on when we're in the middle of it. And do not expect us to kowtow to you getting involved in co-managing this situation with us. So those are just three examples of how we can own the outcome, either way back to we shouldn't have entered this relationship, or we should have done a better job priming and orienting somebody to the rules of success for the relationship overall, or for success in this particular stage or situation we're dealing with.
I love it. I think phrases that I've heard a lot in property management are control the frame and set expectations, right? Like, and what you're describing to me is essentially those things in a customer selection, right? So like, are you having a disqualitative sale versus just like you're trying to sell to everybody so that you're very clear on who you can help and who aligns with you and your team? Are you controlling the frame and setting expectations in onboarding, right? So like, all right, cool. So we decided this person is for us. We're bringing them on. Now let's make sure that we all see eye to eye and we're setting us all up to success. And you're saying, are you controlling the frame and setting expectations situationally, right? House floods. This is how it's going to go. Be ready, But the thing that falls short for me is the other thing that I understand as I'm more and more in this world is that as a property manager, you're just kind of like always in this forever firefight of having to do all these kinds of different things. And you might have gotten to this like scale where you now have like segmented departments and whatnot and can handle this stuff. But how does someone get there when it feels like they're always just trying to catch up, right? Like at what point were you able to flip the switch of being able to be very, very proactive going into like big level to small level interactions versus just feeling like you're always chasing your tail? Like how is that possible for someone that's just drowning in maintenance and leasing and turns and all this kind of stuff?
Well, you know what's incredible? When you ask that question, I think of one thing, and to preface this one thing, what we expect of people um, often determines how they behave.
Hmm.
And so we're a lot more influential than we think we are in the beginning. And an example of that is In my early days of running our property management business, when it was just me and one assistant, I was nervous about people not paying rent and us having to evict them. It created a lot of anxiety for me, as it does for most new operators and most landlords that are DIY landlords or new landlords in general. And so I would over communicate with residents, and I would delay sending out 5-day notices because I didn't want to piss people off. And I would do things in a way that signaled non-verbally to the resident, you're in control. I'm scared that you're not going to do something, and I don't expect you to do the right thing. Like I was wasting time, energy, and effort and draining myself because I didn't have the confidence to demand a certain level of performance from residents. Now, almost most people listening to this episode, this podcast, will recognize that, and they'll recognize that they moved through that. And once they were confident about setting certain expectations for residents, they found that residents rose to those expectations. And in fact, I think that's one of the most charitable things that we do for residents in terms of rent collection is that we give them predictability. This is what I said I would do. This is what you said you would do. And if you don't do what you said you would do, I said I would do this. And you can rely on me 100% of the time to follow that same protocol. There is no ambiguity, there's no uncertainty. And I'm going to bring stability to your life, even though I'm holding you accountable and threatening to evict you from your home. It's actually a healthy dynamic. Okay. What
Hmm.
happens if we apply that same principle to our owners? And this is harder to do, right? Because we're afraid our owners might fire us. We're afraid the owners might write bad reviews about us. We're afraid, like all these fears about what someone might do if they're not happy with us are still in place. But once we get confident enough, and this happens over time as you build your property management company, once you get confident enough that there are owners that exist out there that will meet this standard, and that you can put it forward unflinchingly, and that you can communicate this standard with ever increasing skill, and that in so doing, you basically create the necessary environment to be successful, to deliver consistent high level results that will thrill people over time. But it was my lack of confidence early in my building of my company that prevented that from happening. It's a really empowering idea. We not only
Hmm.
can't own the outcome, we must decide that we're going to own the outcome in order for us to level up and approach that idea with that level of confidence to say, my owners can achieve the expectations I require to be delivering a consistent, high quality result that they're continuously thrilled with industry leading profitability. Wow, could all those things exist in the same sense? Absolutely, they can exist and they must exist. There's only one Walmart. We are not chasing each other to the bottom in fees here. We have to be highly profitable. We have to be exceptional with our service. We have to have really high standards for the properties we manage and the owners we work with. I love Dan Sullivan. He, in one of his books, I don't know if it was Gap in the Gain or it was probably with Who Not How, he said, he gave this anecdote and he said, there was a client that came to us and they were paying us a lot of money for consulting and but they wouldn't do what we said. They wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do their part. So they weren't getting the benefit from the service. So we let them go. And then the person came to them incredulous, said, like, what are you talking about? I am paying you all of this money. How dare you work for me? How dare you let me go? I'm going to say things to people that I know in this industry about you. And he said, look, like we couldn't control what you were going to do while you were a client. We can't control what you're going to do now. The fact remains, we have high standards for our clients, and you're not meeting those standards. I was like, you can say that to people? You, you can have high standards for clients and you can actually say that stuff to people. I was just like, oh my gosh, that is so liberating. So then I wrote down our standards for our clients. And Mark Cunningham does a brilliant job of this, by the way. Go look up his podcast. Anybody listening, go listen to his podcast that he did with Peter Lohman about a year ago, at the end of 2023. Before they'll bring anybody on, the person onboarding that client has to answer 4 questions to the affirmative. So I'll give you my version of those really quick. It's we require support in 3 areas. Financial support. You have to be financially strong enough to own this business, which means you need 10 to 15K in reserve or have access to that money in order for us to move forward. Okay, now gone are any future conversations about like, you sent my draw 1 day late. Not doing that, right? Number 2, I need high support in process. You hired me as the expert. I'm going to get you to the finish line. Let's agree. The four parameters for success are 90-95% occupancy, 10 to 15% maintenance or less maintenance costs, renewing leases more than 50% of the time, and achieving high rents and increasing them as as the market dictates. Right? That's me running your business really well. We agree on those outcomes. Great. Now I require that you allow me to use my process in order to achieve those outcomes. Manage my outcomes, don't manage my process. We're going to be a happy relationship. Our happiest clients are those that want to be truly hands-off. Third area of support is I need your emotional support. That might sound kind of weird, but I actually think of this as a partnership relationship. And when we work together long enough, we will just experience some rough waters. And when those things happen, I'm asking you to be courteous, respectful, supportive, complimentary, and encouraging, not micromanaging, critical, and demeaning. Let's be really clear about that. So these are the three pillars of support.
If you're seeing what we're seeing, listening to this conversation and thinking, I want to be part of this different new world of artificial intelligence and build a modern property management company with agentic AI solutions that break you out of the tedious day-to-day stuff and automate the mundane and allow you to do all the things that you really, really want to do in your business, I suggest you go to our sponsor for the show, Vendoroo.ai. There you can book a demo and hop on board. Vendoroo is a all-in-one maintenance solution where they own the outcome of maintenance for you using agentic AI technology. Go to Vendoroo.ai, book a demo, find out all about it. Let's help you build the property management company of the future. Hope to talk to you soon. Enjoy the show. What I'm hearing and what you're saying is, first of all, I connected so much with you. Like, we both read Dan Sullivan. We both listen to Alex Ramosi. Like, I'm hearing consistency is a pillar of trust from The Speed of Trust with Stephen Covey, right? Like all these kinds of things that we're all striving for. And what you're saying is essentially, if you do it, it will happen for you, right? Like you have to,
If
you
you have
have
the
to set
confidence
the
to
expectation.
demand high,
Yeah.
yes, if you have the confidence to
Yeah.
demand high
Yeah.
support,
Yeah.
if you have confidence to lay that down and say, this is what I require, and I'm
Yeah.
not bending on this, because for me to do the job you want me to do, I have to. One of our core values is confidence and bravery, because it is not easy. Sometimes people are unconsciously testing us with resistance to
Mm-hmm.
prove whether they are safe with us. We are
Yeah.
in partnership, right?
Yeah.
Frame
Yeah.
it that way. When someone's giving you pushback, you know what? They're testing my resolve here. They're testing my confidence about my process. And if I acquiesce to their way of doing things, I'm hurting them and me.
And
But
expertise is another pillar of trust too, right? Like if you're
one of
not injecting your expertise, you're harming the relationship on top of harming the client.
one of my business mentors years ago, is funny. I found this little scrap of paper in my closet a few days ago. I was just shuffling some papers, and I'd written down a note from 2017. Wrote down a note in a meeting with one of my business mentors. He said, "When you give people options, you are no longer the expert."
Mm.
That tweet got over a thousand interactions. So that idea is important, and that idea is part of what we're talking about. We own the outcome. We approach the relationship with enough confidence that we demand a high level of support, and we minimize the options. Because when we give more options, we reduce our credibility, we reduce our influence, we reduce our confidence in the person that's partnering with us. People want the job done. They want a solution that just works. You mentioned The Speed of Trust by Stephen M.R. Covey, one of my favorite books. He said, trust, again, going back to the failure of tech company after tech company, because they didn't understand that trust is the crux. We don't have an efficiency problem in property management, Pablo. We have a trust problem. We have an
Correct.
abundance
Yeah.
mentality, like reward and high trust problem. Everybody's thinking like, I gotta be more efficient, lower my prices. Are you kidding me? You're gonna head into that abyss? No.
Mm. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
says that trust is founded on competence and character. How are we showing our competence and our character in every interaction? And we have to do that by being confident that we require a certain level of support. We are the expert. We know how this goes. once we acquire, and we have some strong-minded clients. So guess what that requires? That requires bravery to enter a conversation where someone's being really strong-minded and they're an engineer for crying out loud. And they've got a better way of doing this problem, attacking this problem than we're attacking it right now. And we're going to go head to head. We got to have a live conversation about justifying our position and proving to them how it's better. No, 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 no. That's a fool's conversation. That's a fool's conversation. We're gonna skillfully leg out of that conversation, reorient the dynamic of the relationship, and require their support,
Hmm.
or we won't be working together.
Another great line that I like from Speed of Trust is a company can have excellent strategy and strong ability to execute, but the net result can either be torpedoed by low trust or multiplied by high trust dividends, right? So, like, this idea that trust is crucial is huge. And everything you're saying sounds good, man, right? Like, I hear this, your rate of speech, your conviction to it, like I inherently know that this is right. People don't want options, they want a guided experience. The more options you give them, the less expert you are. When you walk into Whole Foods and you see 35 types of milk, you forget that you know how to buy milk, right? Like you want to be given the one that's for you. What's the hard part about this, Mark? Like, what are the biggest obstacles that you encounter or that you had to overcome in being able to take this hard line approach towards owning the outcome?
Well, first of all, it's the confidence that people will rise up to my expectations.
Yeah.
That was like a decade, like a full decade to learn that.
How'd you learn that?
Oh man. Ch- I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how
Yeah.
to answer that. How did you
Okay.
learn to be confident? Like eventually you just keep raising the bar. Eventually you just keep saying like, hey, that's not a win for me. Here's what is a win for me. Can we get there? This is not a win for me. I want to be helpful. Like most of us in property, all of us in property management have a servant's heart. We really want to help people and we really want to create value in people's lives. But eventually on this journey, we learn that creating the most value requires that we use our own unique ability, talents, and gifts in their service.
Yep.
And that doesn't necessarily mean we do it the way they think we should do it.
Yep.
It means that we need to get really good about framing and priming them for how we're going to do things, what they should expect, and then exceeding those expectations over and over and over again. And when we raise the bar, every time we incrementally raise the bar and expect more from our clients, and then we find that most people don't leave, but
Yep.
maybe just the ones on the fringe that should be leaving are leaving, then it's like confirmation, like, oh wow, maybe we should raise the bar again. And the most successful companies in the long run, like Grace Property Management that Mark Cunningham runs, have raised the bar high enough that that there's just incredible stability and once you have incredible stability and goodwill with residents and owners, and by the way, there's exceptional opportunity for generating goodwill and generating tremendous value to residents, but most of us don't even think about it. And we're leaving a huge opportunity on the table, and we can talk about that in another thread. But once we have the confidence to require a high level of support from owners, it increases our ability to contribute more value to the relationship. And we see evidence of that when we dare to raise that bar.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. And I'm essentially hearing you can't get jacked by reading about push-ups. You kind of just going through it, right? Like you are iterating, testing, getting the positive results based on it. I also think that there's a certain level of confidence you can draw from like I think that cognitive bias is a really real thing. This idea of someone listening to the conviction in your voice of how well this has gone for you is a way to draw confidence in this, right? So I'm hoping that our friend that's listening to us right now can even if they're completely doubting themselves, take this level of confidence, take your experience and apply this and go test this for the first time, right? Like until you draw that hard line and you disqualify someone because they don't fit your frame, right? Or you talk back to an owner saying, no, 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 I'm the expert here. This is what you hired me for. Like, this is what we need to do. It's not an option, like, and see how that happens until our friend goes through this. She's not gonna like gain that confidence herself, but hopefully she can take confidence in what you're saying, right?
Absolutely. Here's something else on the frontier of where we're trying to get better in this regard. I think those conversations with owners. Oh, okay, so we've got accidental landlord with limited or no business experience. suddenly spontaneously becomes a business owner and hires a business manager. But they're not seeing it that way. They think, oh, I've got a rental property. You're going to do a job for me. You work for me. You're going to do it the way I want. This is my property, damn it. You're going to fall in line. Not the right mindset. So we've got accidental landlord becomes business owner and they hire us as a business manager. That's a hard relation. Like just to, I think about my journey as a business owner, like 15 years now.
Yeah.
Like, what have I learned? How have I changed my thinking to think more effectively as a business owner? So, when we have problems in property management that require conversations with clients, not only are we just trying to solve the problem at hand, we're trying to help that owner think about the problem like a
Mhm.
business owner
Mm.
in which they have no experience being a business owner. So there's a tremendous amount of skill required for some of these conversations. And I think what's lacking in our industry, Pablo, in a big way, is advanced skill training for property managers, especially in the SFR space. Because multifamily, you're just dealing with residents, and that's pretty linear, right? But if you're
Mhm.
dealing with owners that have no business being a business owner and being in a relationship with a business manager, and now you're not only trying to help them see clearly that you've got the right solution to their problem, but you're also helping them reframe the way they're thinking about the problem and their relationship with you at the same time. Man, that's a that's a really dynamic,
Yeah.
multifaceted conversation. It's not just, hey, get the hell out of my way. I've got the right solution for this. It's like how do we bring them through that conversation changed and transformed, but also inherent in that conversation is an opportunity to add tremendous value. Because if you can take an owner by the hand and help them transform into a sophisticated,
Yeah.
business-minded, forward-thinking, like visionary entrepreneur and investor, now you've hit the highest tier of value contribution you can, which is transformation, right?
Yeah.
So, where's the university or the school that teaches that skill? It doesn't exist. We want to
Yeah.
create it, actually. We call it the MVP University, but to be able to handle it masterfully, there's a really good book called Crucial Conversations that I recommend everybody reads.
I've read it. I've read it. It helped me a lot with my marriage.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Man, I love it. I think of it all as it's all almost like a parable within a parable, right? Like I believe most property managers didn't really grow up thinking that they were going to be property managers, right? They've become business owners in this world because they saw an opportunity and it happened and now they're growing this as well. And like if they can look at the value of business mentorship in their life and then be able to see themselves as okay, so because my experience is parallel to this accidental landlord's experience that they maybe didn't see themselves doing this when they grow up and now they're doing it and now they're a business owner and I can be a business mentor to this, right? Like this flywheel, this ecosystem of value that you're talking about becomes very, very obvious, right? Like look beyond the offer, right? Like the offer, the ask of being your property manager is very small in relation to the offer of what the property manager can provide of like, not only can I manage your property, not only can I be the person that is the steward of your future wealth creation and your retirement dreams and all this optionality you want in your life, but I can also be this person that helps you think the way that you need to be to become the person that you want to be, and become this business owner. And I love it,
100%.
man. I think we've hit that pretty good, man. Before we get off of this, where do you think the industry is going, Mark? Right? Like if we are going into this world of more accidental landlords, right? Like the great generational wealth transfer is about to create an avalanche of accidental landlords, right? Like I would assume that these boomer portfolio holders at least purposefully went out and acquired a lot of these properties. We're about to have a whole handover of properties from like parent to daughter or son that is going to be almost like a an exponentialization of like the accidentalness of being a landlord. What do you think that means for the industry? Like where do you think this goes?
I think that the company that figures out, we've got a few big players in the nation, but a lot of them are big through acquisition. I
Hmm.
think the first company that figures out how to get truly large in our space, to truly scale
Hmm.
organically, where they're just growing without having to just bolt on all these small operators. The person that figures that out is going to be masterfully good at empowering individual property managers to think like entrepreneurs within the business, that they own the outcome, which means they own the trust relationship with their owners. And they're getting so much value from the parent company, these property managers, they wouldn't think of leaving, but they, blood, sweat, and tears, connect with each individual landlord owner in a personal way, requiring high levels of support so they can standardize operations and skillfully and masterfully have these types of conversations that continually level up those relationships. I think that's the brand. Those are the ideas that's going to cause one company or a few companies to truly become huge in our space. No one's solved that problem at scale really effectively yet, and I think it's going to happen in the next 10 years. And it's going to be because they focused on empowering the property manager and giving them all the tools they need to protect and enhance that level of trust and transform the relationship beyond property management, but also to asset management, to capital management. At the end of the day, these accidental landlords have latent capital sitting in an asset, maybe not even at its highest and best use for them. So if we can change our thinking and empower that trust, someone's going to just blow us all away. And there's going to be a truly incredible company at scale that, like Charles Koch took his family's business from 20 million revenue in the 1960s to
Yeah.
150 plus billion revenue now, because they understood and harnessed those true principles. They imbued them into the organization, and they created just this exponential growth because of it.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. I think when what I've studied really in depth is just how inflection points create these giant opportunities and this giant value creation, and what you see across the way. And obviously we're talking about the inflection point with a great generational transfer. I think this inflection point in AI also like multiplies what's happening, and what you see across all this supports your theory, right? Like when these big things change, a new context creates a new missing, right? Like either a new problem to be solved or like a new way to solve an old problem. And then that drives innovation. And if it's done correctly, what you said happens. One big company ends up winning the large majority of the market share, right? Like one big company cracks this thing, and generally the mathematics is 76% of market share, and then everybody else is fighting for 24%. And that's how you see that's the dynamics of Amazon, of Netflix, of Uber, of Airbnb, right? Like all these different companies that have done this. I also think in property management, because it's to me, in order for this to happen, it really runs through the path of, does AI become agentic? Does AI substitute people in real ways, right? Like in the ability to control, to set expectations and own an outcome, right? Like, does AI provide that service? And once that happens, it'll allow the scale, but it's also the next thing that's going to happen is not it's not just, is there Coke and is there Pepsi and is there Dr. Pepper? I think it's going to become like one big company that does this and like maybe one or two others that are relevant on a national scale. And then everybody else is going to be, it's going to follow kind of like e-commerce or kind of like Uber, where it's just like in a local market, there is going to be very, very attractive companies to own that are just like one person, three people, four people that just are able to like be very, very profitable with a very small footprint. And it becomes more like the Uberization of it, where like you can just own your market locally, and have a really prosperous business because again, technology is going to provide all this stuff. What do you think about that, man?
You touched on AI. There's no doubt in my mind that AI plays a vital role to the coming transformation of our industry and that emerging dominant player or players. An obvious application, and I think this is exactly what Vendoroo is doing, is I think it has the potential to do it better than humans. Clarify, troubleshoot, and create a work order better than humans, because just over and over and over and over, I'm stubbing my toe on this thing. Like, oh, well, you forgot to check maintenance history. Well, this is a recurring issue from over a year ago. I'm not going to check all that maintenance history. Guess what? AI does it instantly, or it could, right? Well, you forgot to check that there was a home warranty and send out that template email to both owner and resident that, hey, this is a home warranty's in place. Here's what's, oh, well, I forgot to do that. Yeah, but this vendor could get there a little bit faster. Well, now you got an upset owner. Like there's so many little steps
Yeah.
to solving maintenance correctly that in taking maintenance the right way, if it can be standardized and automated,
Yeah.
man, now what we've done is we freed up a little bit more of the property manager's time to do what? To take the owner by the hand and have this transfer. They have more energy and time to take
Yeah.
the owner by the hand and make those trust deposits in that emotional bank account, right? It's going to be vital.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, what to tell you what we're seeing, 80 to 85% of maintenance can be just completely taken off of your plate, right? Like it's never going to take it all off, but like if you're taking 80 to 85% of work orders off of someone's plate, like think about how much time that frees up to babysit the real work orders that really need that really need that, the flood, right? Not the broken faucet or whatever, or go out and do business development or go out and like, spend all this time doing it. The key is it's going to happen across all these different sectors, right? It's going to happen in leasing, it's going to happen in maintenance, it's going to happen in
Yeah,
all
not
these
just
things.
maintenance. And once
Yeah.
we apply AI in the right way to standardize operations and produce a high quality, consistent result, right?
Yeah.
We're moving toward greater standardization. AI is going to play a critical role in this. And then
Yeah.
eventually, we're going to be something like the insurance agency, where property management is just fulfilled. It's just fulfilled on the back end. In the
Yeah.
front end, it's just an agent that has a relationship with you.
Yeah, I think it's that. And what you said I think on Peter's podcast, you talked about this idea of like, you start to differentiate through being more of a hospitality company, right? Like, how can you create these experiences? How can you have like a niche around something? How can you, provide for better quality of life based on things that only uniquely humans can do, as opposed to eliminating menial tasks that nobody else wants to do? Like, that's all going to become a commodity.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some really cool things going on in our industry right now with measuring operational metrics, standardizing operational metrics. In the not too distant future, we'll be able to prove to our owners that not only is your property being managed correctly, it's being managed in the top 15% of all properties in the nation, right? Now we're able to frame that conversation in a way that, like, you don't just have to trust me that we're doing the right thing. We have proof that we're doing the right thing. AI is going to automate things and support us. And now
Yeah.
we're off to the races. Now we can really scale.
That's something I'd like to challenge. I think there's real value in understanding your scorecard. I think there is, and knowing whether you're in the top 15%. But I'll tell you, man, I love my property manager. I know that my property manager is one of the best in the world, right? Like of my properties. And yet, when something crappy happens in my property, when I feel like a human has like over has this is happening to me right now, right? Like we are having an issue with one of my residents, who happens to be my neighbor because I live in a duplex and I'm renting this one out. So it's the one that's like closest to home. And the they were supposed to get a new lease that was already a pain in the butt to negotiate. And this lease should have been signed. And now she's like hitting us up and saying, hey, I thought that we were supposed to have this done and blah, 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 blah. At that moment, I could not care less that you are a top 5% like property management company and this is how you perform. I'm still having a conversation with my wife about like, do we change property managers or not? Right. So like, I think the standardization piece is really important for us internally. I don't know how effective it's going to be to communicate it. I think it's really going to be trust. It's really going to be the things that you are talking about of like, hey, have I level set expectations ahead of this happening? When this is happening, how available am I to you to like talk you off a ledge and like do all these things? And can I respond to these things? Right. Like I do wonder how much standardization is the goal versus how much personalization is the goal. And AI is going to allow you to do all the stuff you that would kill your time if that you can't personalize about, right? Like it's going to free you into full personalization mode.
You know what? Yeah, we could talk a lot about that. That one idea, standardization versus personalization. And there's a really powerful combination and the right combination that we have to get right in property management. If we personalize our operations too much, we're dead. If we standardize our relationships too much, we're dead. There's a brilliant mesh of the two that come together in the right mixture that lead to success. And we could talk a lot about that.
Yeah, I think that's the next conversation because we're definitely making a quote card about that one, right? If we personalize our operations too much, we're dead. If we standardize our relationships too much, we're dead. I believe in
That's
that
it.
wholeheartedly. Last question, Mark. The theme of this show is really about showcasing people that like are daring to like push the envelope, right? Like showcasing how prosperous it can be to do this. The downside of doing that is that change is really, really hard and it drives a lot of fear. And we're trying to create this like cognitive bias around this idea that we change all the time, right? So, what is something that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you were 100% sure of that nowadays you're like 100% you know that that wasn't true and that you operate from a standpoint of like that being an advantage to you.
Totally. It was that people must be managed, sort of forced to work hard, that they are inherently lazy and they must be compelled. And that's completely wrong. I think when you find the right people, you have the right vision, and you can actually connect with people on your team. Look, we're exchanging the best hours of our days and the best days of our lives. It better matter. We better be coming together to do something that matters. And you know what? People are here for the journey. They want to work hard. The right people want to learn. They want to be challenged. They want to be coached to their absolute best. That's what we came for. And I think my understanding of that now has completely transformed the way I hire, the way I interact with team, and the way that I expect greater results from them unapologetically. I used to feel guilty that I make a lot more money than the people that work with me. Not anymore. It's like this is the dynamic and the relationship we're in right now. I'm not going to apologize for asking you to do your best and then some because that's what you deserve.
I love it, man. Mark, this has absolutely met my expectations. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time.
You too,
I
man. This is fun.
Yeah, yeah, this is cool, man. I really admire just kind of like how you are able to think in a philosophical matter and also act in a practical way around it and explain it all, man. I think it's cool that you have started really like leaning into content creation and I think it's going to do a lot of good. So I'm pumped to connect. I'm pumped to do this rim to rim hike with you, man. And
Man, I
I hope
can't
that we
wait.
get to do a bunch of other really cool stuff together, man.
Really appreciate you, Pablo. Thanks for everything you stand for. Thanks for bringing a voice and shining a light on things that matter.